get started. I want to talk about kind of picking up where we left off from yesterday in this bank account situation that we have. So I'm going to make a new window for like Googling in case we need it, and we very well might, right? And we've got this here, and just as a reminder, we had like Ruby accounts.rb, right? And we were able to open this up and then create a new account. We could look at the account and see that when we initialized this account, it had an instance variable for balance and an instance variable for user ID. And we've spent some time talking about how, because of that, we are able to go into account and like write different methods outside of initialize, right? So this isn't the only place that we have access to this type of variable. As long as an instance of account stays alive, its instance variables stay alive too, and we can use them method to method. So one of the first methods that we talked about yesterday was these attr readers, attr accessors, because we'd like to have an easy method type way to access these reusable and rewritable instance variables across our code. And so that's what we do down here, right? When we call self.balance equals balance minus amount, we're using our balance reader right here to get our current value of the instance variable at balance through a method that looks like this under the hood. And then when we say self.balance equals, we're calling a method that looks like this under the hood to take in whatever's on the right-hand side of our equal sign, bring that in as the argument new balance, and use that to set a new value for our instance variable. So that's just a refresher on kind of initialization, readers and writers, and we might recall that we have this optional argument here. Something else to chew on, if the equal sign, some value, makes an argument optional, do we think that we could do an optional argument everywhere, or do we think that an optional argument might be like not as placeable everywhere? Like, could you think of like maybe a problem if we flipped the order of these arguments and did it like this? What happens if the first argument of a two-argument method is optional? What happens then when you pass in just one argument? That's right. Yep, and then I think that you might actually end up with an argument error anyway, because it would still be looking for a user ID that didn't have a default. So optional arguments always need to trail on the end of a method, basically, because that's, because the order matters, we'd want the stuff at the very end of the order to be the stuff that is the most loosey-goosey in terms of how we expect it to arrive. That's also, you can almost draw a similar line to like an if-else statement, that you generally want your if to be the most specific possible case, and then you do more general cases as you go down various else-ifs and elses. Cool. So that's just kind of a warm-up question before we dive in. And yeah, Derek asks, does that mean that we can't have more than one? I think that we can have more than one optional argument. We actually can even do something like this. Splat. Let's see what this does. This little splat before a word, I think, means that we're going to have access to that word inside of here. So I'm going to do a binding.pry at this point. And so when we're about to create a new account, I'm going to create it with all three things. I'm going to say 42, $500, and then I'll say like boat true duffel. I'm just thinking this is going to work. I'm not sure if it will. What I'm expecting to happen here is that by putting this little star before this very last argument, I'm saying I don't know how many more arguments are going to come in here, but I'm ready to collect all of them in like an argument array, and I'd like to call that args in this case. So what I'm going to check is, when I run this code, can I get into a binding.pry? Can I see that the user ID is set to 42? And then can I see that the balance is set to 500? And then can I see what happened to these last three arguments if they all somehow got looped in here some way? Let's see what happens. Let's exit out, hop back in, hit our pry and initialize this time. Very good. And so now we can take a look. And once again, just as a reminder, because this is our focus for today, I'm in initialize. Is that a class method or an instance method at this point? I called .new on the class account to get here. But am I in a class method right now, or am I in an instance method? And how could I tell? One way I could tell is if I'm in this method, right? Then the context where this method is being called is accessible through self. So if I type self inside of initialize, I see that I have our instance notation for account. Also notice here that on line 9 it doesn't have any instance variables yet. That's because it hasn't been given them. Or sorry, on line 8. We get a user ID on line 9, we get a balance on line 10, right? We can access those things as the arguments that they are. Right? User ID was 42 when we called account.new from our code. And then the balance, I think, would be 500 based on this call. It is 500, showing like that this is indeed the account that's being created right now. When we called self, we're really looking at ACCT, right? And then let's look at what args is. And by putting the little, we call this a splat, or this asterisk in front of the last argument, we're able to take in any number of arguments here. So that's interesting syntax. And then another way that we could try with this is if we don't care, or sorry, if we do care how many things come in, maybe here we'd say something like, what about this? VIP equals false. We'll have an optional argument for VIP, right? At VIP, because like maybe VIP members of this bank get like extra perks or something, like different interest rates, or maybe like have like a concierge that they can rely on. So in this case, I'm going to say nothing. I'm just going to pass in 42, and I'm going to see if both of these trailing things get set so that we have balance 100 VIP false. Also, I'm going to move the binding.pry down to the bottom of initialize, because I think that if I call self at the very end of initialize, then I'll be able to see the instance that's being created, and I'll also be able to see all of the instance variables that have been set at that point. So I'll see like the full object that's ready to come off the line out of the account class when we call .new. So let's try that out. We run ruby account.rb. We're in a binding.pry from calling account.new with just 42 being passed in. So we can take a look at what our account is. Could I look at ACCT from here? No, I can't, right? Because I'm in initialize, and ACCT is a local variable outside of the class. Can't use that to access the account, right? I could be in here and call like account.new, but that's not going to work, right? I can't, I'd have to pass in new arguments again, and if I'm going to call initialize from within initialize, I feel like I'm going down a rabbit hole I don't want to be in. So this is where I remember, once again, self is the way for me to get my bearings and figure out where I'm at. We can see that self here is now the instance of account. It has been given our balance of 100, it's been given our user ID of 42, and our default VIP of false. So that's a long way to answer that question, but I wanted to also kind of review the mechanics of initialization in more detail, so thanks so much for that springboard. Before I go on, I want to talk about a new norm that I'd like to do in our lectures. Actually, two new norms. The first thing, I feel very bad. I forgot to tell you that everybody's supposed to clap at the end of lectures. We're not going to clap, though. We're not going to come off mute for that. But just at the end of lectures, let's all do a bang bang to show appreciation in the chat. And then when anybody else is presenting blogs and stuff later on, that's how we'll universally show appreciation. The second, more immediate need that I have as a norm change for this lecture is in recognition of the fact that sometimes you have a question about something that I'm talking about, and then the question maybe takes too long to type, and you're also trying to figure out what the heck it is I'm saying now that I moved on. So if you just throw one of these up in the chat, this would be a signal to me to like slow my roll and pause for questions so that people can articulate what it is that they're wondering about, and then that could hopefully be a way to hit the brakes faster in the chat without having to like play that game of I need to also be actively listening so I don't get even further lost. Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, when I looked for the splat args up here, it was up here. I called it just args, and then splat args ends up being an array that's basically whatever extra args you get given in order. And when you think about like how a terminal command sometimes works, you sometimes add a lot of extra like optional flags and optional arguments on the end of like a, hey, let's do a git clone, but then we'll have these options, or let's do a git init with these other options. When you run things in the command line, they sometimes have methods under the hood that are designed to take optional numbers of trailing arguments. So that's kind of fun. So yeah, there's I think a couple of labs that talk about this in a little more detail. This part of it isn't super important. I want to focus more on this notion of being able to track the instance that we've got inside of any instance method in a class. Because if that's our scope, if we're at the scope of one thing that's being created, then self is going to be that instance, right? So we talked about another thing yesterday, I'm gonna transition to put statements now instead of binding.pry because I'd like a slightly faster feedback loop. So what I mean by that is if I care about the value of self at this line, instead of doing a binding.pry and typing self, I'll just put self because then every single time I run initialize, it's going to show me the object that's being initialized. And maybe I could even put another flag up here like puts initializing the following account. And now every time I run this and create an account, it gives me a little bit of feedback. Ruby account.rb, initializing the following account, and then it shows like account. Now, what's interesting to me here is that I didn't like see the information that I saw when I like called on self here, and I'm wondering why that might be the case. So let's take a look. I said puts self here. Puts is the simpler printout, right? This is the easy mode printout for like users that don't need to know about all the details. I'm a developer. I want to inspect the details, so I say p self here instead. P calls .inspect on the object, and that's how with a custom Ruby object I can see my instance variables that I like. So P versus puts, right? P will tell me more. Puts will make it maybe a little bit neater for a user. But now I feel even better, like I can see that we've initialized this account, that the account can speak for itself and talk about those things. Great. So let's talk about another context here. Let's talk about what happens up here. What if I P self from here? Puts not inside an instance method, but inside the class. What is self? And then I'll do p self out here. Let's clear the screen with Command K and run this again. Let's see what we get. Because scope matters, right? If I'm inside an instance method, then self will be called at the moment that instance method runs. If I'm inside the class but not inside an instance method, then self at that point is a mirror not reflecting on one given instance, but instead on the class itself. So we have class account and we have instances of account. I'd like to do a little quiz game first to imagine that we're interrogators and we know that there is a notion of a class and a notion of an instance. We know that a class is like a level removed, that the instance is one specific bank account and that classes are responsible for maybe having meta knowledge about a lot of bank accounts, or maybe even be responsible for what happened as the accounts got created. If I needed to sit down and ask a question, who is the user that owns this bank account? Would that be an instance type question or a class type question? It's an instance type question. I think this bank account might be the tell there, and like the user, I'm thinking about one at a time. Would it also be an instance type question? Anybody else, if I wanted to know what the balance of an account was? Or would that be something different? So I want to know the balance of one bank account. Yeah, if I want to know something about like one particular bank account, I think that the instance is responsible for that. Okay, harder question. Can anybody think of a kind of question you might want to ask about a bank account or bank accounts that would not be instance scoped, but instead would be scoped to a class? Something bigger than like, what's this one account's balance? Any ideas there? Okay. How many accounts there are? And Alex, what did you have? So yeah, I think that there's I want to be really precise because I can see an instance potential and a class potential there. If I wanted to know whether a given account was savings or checking, I feel like that would be an instance type method to run to like ask one account, right? If I wanted to know which percentage of accounts in a given bank were savings versus checking, that would require me to know about more than one account, and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to ask just one account for that kind of information. I'd go to the overall class, right? So notice like how many accounts are there, what percentage of accounts are savings or checking, maybe which account has the highest or lowest balance out of all the bank accounts, right? I think that we all sometimes look at our bank account and go, I know this for a fact from an instance perspective that I have the lowest bank balance of all the accounts, but we can't know that for sure. That's just a feeling that we have, right? And we'd never have access to that information as an individual bank customer. So like if you wouldn't know it as an individual, it's probably not like a good instance method candidate. So here's the thing. Here's how we put this together. If when I say the word self out here, I'm talking about the class account, right? Um, you can. I don't know if you knew this, but you can. Let me back up real quick. I have this account, right? Let me go back into a binding.pry. I want to show you something kind of fun. I'm going to create a very simple method that just says hello, and I'm going to call it say hi, and I'm going to assign it just to this account instance using like a fun little Ruby trick. Uh, let's see here. So Ruby account.rb, I have ACCT. It's an instance of account, right? And I'm going to create account 2. Oops, account 2 equals account.new, and this one will be 99 as the ID. Great. So I have this account got created. This account also got created, and yeah, when this one initialized, that's where our printout was before the pry. So we have one that has 42. We have another one that has 99. So I want to try this. Def, I'm going to define a method now. Check this out. Def account dot say hi puts hello from account 42. And then we end. And now I call account.sayHi. Kind of neat, right? Like I take an instance and I define a method, but instead of just defining a method say hi, I define a method on the thing I want the method to be attached to. So can I call say hi on account 2? Any guesses? If I try this, do you think this will work because it's also an account? Or do you think it's not going to work because it's not the same account? Okay? We have a guess for no. Any guesses for yes? I just want people to be like holding on to the weight of their own expectation because I think that learning happens faster when you expect something. Cool. You know what you expect? Let's see what happens. It doesn't work because we only attached it to ACCT. We only attached say hi to that one instance of account, right? And we know that implicitly when we define a method inside the class, that attaches the method to every instance of account. So how do I attach a method to the class, right? Because we talked about instance methods. I want to make a class method. I want a method that can tell me how many accounts there are, right? That's my next goal. I want to figure out a class method that I can say like account dot count, and it'll just tell me how many accounts there are total, right? This is the syntax I'd like to use. Class account, I have a question for you that I can't ask to an instance. Can you tell me what the number, right? And check this out. It says undefined method count for account class. Look at these two errors really carefully, because as you work through instance and class labs, these errors are going to tell you a lot. When you see undefined method for, and then you see this kind of syntax, it's an instance method that's undefined, right? And when we see this kind of syntax, it's a class method that's undefined. And so I need to figure out how to write this method as a class method. Well, we saw this, that we can refer to self, and we can access the class account from this scope, right? So what if we tried this? Def count, right, as a method, but what if we attached it to self? Because I'm not in the method yet here, right? I'm still kind of in this class vibe. And so if the rule is that you're in an instance method, the second that you're inside the method body, self is like the instance. But if we haven't even defined the method yet, we don't know if it's an instance method yet. And at this scope, self is the account class. So therefore, if I say def self.count, I'm defining a method, but it's not for instances of the account. This is going to be for the whole account class because that's what self is at this point in my scope. This is why self can be very tricky because just moving the self off of this makes this an instance method. But the rule of thumb, if you're just trying to think of like what is the thing I need to do to make a class method, Duke, it's you start a method inside of a class with self dot. I just wanted to attempt to kind of show the why behind it by showing how we attach methods using any Ruby syntax and demonstrate it on one account. So now we can see that if we put it on the class itself, then maybe that'll give us the behavior. Let's see. Yay. If it works, I'm celebrating. Let's hop back out and back in and see. I'm going to call account.count. Hey, that worked this time, right? No undefined method. So by putting self.count, right, we end up with a class method that we can use on the account class. Yeah, could we say def account.sayHi? Let's try that out. Let's try def account.all. Puts here are all the accounts. end. And then we call account.all. Yeah, we totally could. Yep, same logic, right? So we can basically by doing that kind of dot chaining, right? When we define these within classes, we tend to use the self keyword, right? I could have said account.count here, that would work the same way, except that I'm repeating myself kind of, right? Because like I'm already in a class called account. It's pretty clear that like within the walls of account that I should be thinking about the class scope, and so self becomes the word that Rubyists tend to use. Also because when we want to reuse code, sometimes self ends up reflecting perfectly on like whatever thing is that's using a given method, so then you could share methods across different types of instances and let each instance talk about itself as itself. Yeah, could we run def account.sayHi? Would it run on every instance? Great question. Yeah, if I define a class method that only works on the class account. So we defined this account.all just now, right? That we know that this works on the class account. I'll run it again. Works just fine. We know we have an instance of account, ACCT. Can we run ACCT.all? We cannot, because all is not defined on an instance of account. All is only defined on the account class. Similarly, we can't do, what did we have? Do we have say hi? ACCT.say hi? I think I'm in a new session, so I lost the method before. So I'll try this again. Def acct.say hi. I'm going to define say hi again on an instance. And if I can call say hi on account, I can't call it on I can call it on the account instance. I don't think I can call it on the class. Yeah, so different scopes imply different method usability. If I'm talking about class methods, even if there's an instance method of the exact same name, the class method is the one that I'm going to be using if I'm calling it on a class, right? Let's demonstrate that. Let's have an instance method called count. So def count. And this could just be an alias for balance, right? We could say like the number or the count of monies is, and then we could just put in our balance. And I'm saying self here because I know that this would be an instance method because there's no self dot at the beginning. So I'm pretty sure that I'll be able to say the count of my monies, my as like this bank account instance, and this should be this instance's balance. Then we have this self dot count which just says yay. So let's see what happens here. We go back in here. We have our account instance, and so I expect that when I call acct.count, it's going to run that instance method and tell me about the balance. And if I call class method count, that's going to run it for the class. Yeah, question. Mm-hmm. Balance is defined here. The difference is the context and of the scope that we're in. So if I define an instance method in a class, everything that happens inside of that method is instance scoped. So I could only be talking about self as one instance of the class from inside of an instance method because when I call this method, I have to call it on a given instance of account. So as the method is running, self will refer to whatever instance of account I've called it on. When I run this method, because self was the class here, I'm only going to be calling it on the class. And we could even see in here if I do like a p self from the account.count, I would expect this to just be capital A account because it's a class method. It should reflect back on the class. And if I p self here, this should reflect back on just the instance of the class. Let's see what this does. Maybe this will give more clarity on the changing nature of self. It really is just a mirror. It tells you about the walls that it's inside of. So if I say account. Yeah. Great question. Yeah, generally in Ruby we have this notion of encapsulation as a good design pattern that we'd like to use. Encapsulation is the notion that if we have a choice to have data exposed to a program that we have to manage and manipulate like by hand, or if we just have a method that returns some data that we can have in the program, we'd prefer to have a method because then if we need to reuse data in multiple places in the program and the nature of how we deal with that data needs to change universally, we only have to rewrite the method that returns the data instead of having to keep track of all of the places that we called on, like at balance. One example for this might be that an account's balance is adjusted based on like pending transactions, right? Sometimes you go to a bank and it shows you a balance and it tells part of the truth but not all the truth. And so you're not just reading the pure instance variable, you'd be maybe doing some modification to that instance variable. And so knowing that at the start we're just dealing with at balance being inside of this adder reader, uh, if we needed to rewrite balance, we could do this. We could say like adder writer balance, and then we manually write a reader def balance. And maybe like you get a bonus $100 if you're a VIP, right? That's the nice thing about being a VIP. So I'd say like if self dot VIP, then we will say that the balance or return at balance plus $100, else just at balance. This is like a really naive like implementation, but just to show that like if later on my code grew and it wasn't enough for me to just talk about at balance, but there was more work that I had to do with it to determine how it would be returned, it would make more sense for me to call the method that let that happen as opposed to having this if else work have to happen wherever we needed to talk to at balance. So they both work. I think it's a stronger design pattern to call the method than to talk to the pure instance variable. And indeed, later on when we get into other Ruby things, you're going to see other people refer to these adder readers and adder accessors kind of just without even thinking about it. Basically, like right now, you're at the point with initialize where we're just kind of figuring out what an instance variable is doing. But I'm asking you to very quickly, like the second that you understand how to use at balance, I'd like you to start trying to refactor from saying at balance to saying like self.balance or just referring to balance and letting Ruby implicitly figure out that I'm calling that balance method. Yeah, it doesn't really do anything different, right? Except later on as the code grows and needs to change, we find as programmers that we'd much stronger prefer to have the method call than all these at balances sitting around, because then what happens if the work with at balance needs to be tweaked or changed? I'd much rather just change the method and have everything kind of cascade out from that method call as opposed to like, oh, I missed one at balance that I had to change to something else and now my code broke. But yeah, that's they both work, and I think that in terms of make it work, make it right, make it fast, I might start with something like this, right? Like at balance equals at balance minus amount for withdrawing, and this works just fine. And then later on, maybe I come back through the lab and I go, is this place that I could just call the method on myself and just practice doing that? And then maybe when I get comfortable with that, I say, okay, can I also call this method? And I practice doing that, and then I go, okay, how much can I even pare this down and let Ruby take charge? And then I end up with something like this, which is very idiomatic, but it is just an idiom, right? The meanings of the words are going to be what they are, regardless of which synonyms we happen to use. So I guess I'm just saying the method calls are going to help us a lot, especially when we get into Rails in Mod 2, because a lot of the programming design patterns that I'm trying to show you now are kind of baked into the Rails assumptions later. So the faster that you learn them and get used to them, the easier it's going to be for you to read other documentation for other Ruby tools that kind of has those assumptions at heart too. And Rubens, you had a question? Oh, sorry. Yeah. No. That's right. And it's very hard with these labs because these labs are trying to see in this tiny little code base, can you write like 12 or 13 lines of code to demonstrate that you can do something with it? We don't actually have projects that grow and change over time. So like we have the need to do the technical task, but as real life programmers, we also have the need to maintain code over time. So we don't just try to write the code that solves the problem today, we try to write the code that leaves us in a position to solve any type of problem in the future. Thinking of a chess player, right, that just doesn't go to like capture the strongest piece if it's going to weaken their overall position. They try to like maintain a good posture, flex the knees, so to speak, is what we're thinking of. Yeah, for sure. Rubens, what was your question? Correct. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to write a method that simultaneously is an instance method and a class method. I'm always going to have to do something kind of manually to tweak that. And that's probably a good thing, right? Because the second I decided I wanted an account class, what I was really deciding is I want certain methods that can only be called on an instance of account, or that can only be called on the account class. Otherwise, I could just define all these methods in open space, right? But if I did that, then I'd have all these collision points where like any kind of withdraw, like I could withdraw a cat or I could withdraw a boot, or like if the account is connected to like a headquarters, I could call headquarters.withdraw, and that doesn't make any sense semantically. So because we draw these walls in that way, kind of laterally, we're also kind of drawing them vertically to make sure that we don't get crossed up in what scope we're in. That's a great question though. Cool. So we have this like count stuff, right? We have these instance variables, which we talked about at the beginning. Like as long as the instance stays alive in a running Ruby session, we can call all these other instance methods, and they will either access the instance variable directly, right? Or they'll access the instance variable through a layer of abstraction of like our adder, reader, adder, accessor. But the instance variable means that we don't have to worry about losing our variables because we left one local method, right? What I want to talk about is not losing awareness of my instances after the instance has been created. So I want to create another kind of variable that has even more scope, right? And I'm not a global variable. We mentioned before that like if you change a global variable, then somebody else is relying on it. That gets screwed up. It's jumped too many walls. So I want a variable that can still stay within the walls of this class, but can live even beyond one instance, right? But into other instances too. And what I'm talking about is a class variable. So check this out. If I have a class variable called count, and I set this to 0, right? If my count in self.count is supposed to return the number, tell me how many bank accounts there are, right? If that's the goal, what I could do every single time I initialize, right, a new bank account, I could do this, at count plus equals 1. I want to increment this class variable. So then at any time, I think I should be able to access this class variable from the class method, and then the account class can give me a readout on how many times it's run this initialize method and had a reason to increment the counter. Let's see. Let's exit out. Let's come back in. I want to call account.count and see if we get a number here. Oh, I won't. Why? Because I've returned something else. I've put a line after the thing I want, so I'm going to get rid of that and run it back. Okay, this is the one I want. Now I'm confident I'm going to see what I'm looking for. Account.count. Yeah, that's 1. And why? Because we have a count, right, that we created. We don't have a count 2. And because like every time we exit a pry session, Ruby's like short-term memory that it spun up, the RAM that it created to run Ruby, just kind of gets dumped back into the operating system for the rest of the computer to use again, and we just lose all the variables that we created the previous time. Next week we'll have databases, so we'll be able to persist this information, but for now we can trust that like if I didn't create a variable before I hopped into a pry session, I'm not going to have it in that pry session. I have to create it myself. So I'll say account2 equals account.new. Oops. Sort of a Creole account there, if I pronounce that phonetically. Wow. All right. Sweet. So that's the second account. And if we ran through this, it did say initializing the following account, right? So if that happened, that means that this must have happened, or else we would have had an error message. And that means our count should be higher now. Account.count. And isn't that neat that like the class gets to know about this information that like lives above and beyond what instances are. Let's get real funky with this though, right? When I'm initializing the following account and I say self inside of initialize, that gives me, because initialize is an instance method, the instance being created right here, right? What if we had another instance variable or class variable? What if we had something like this? At all, and I want to make this an array, because what I'd like to do is be able to call def self.all. I'd like to have a class method that will give me all of the bank accounts that were created. and just read the class variable. This is kind of like a class level attribute reader method, right? And you might be thinking, is there a Ruby way, like add a reader, add a accessor, that I could just say this but have it fit for a class method scope? And there is, and I would strongly encourage you to Google it if you have that question, because if you're capable of having that question at this point in the lecture, I bet you're going to be lucky when you go off researching it. So see about that. But for now, it's enough to write it this way, right? I'm going to stick in the make it work. I'm not going to do a whole bunch of like funky Ruby things to turn these into like class methods that look like instance methods. So yeah, we have these class methods. They'll read these values. So the next time we open this up, if I call account.all, I should see that empty array, right? Because that's the value of the class variable. And account.count will give me the value of the other class variable. So how do I fill up this array? How can I make sure that all is full of account instances? Where would I do that? Any thoughts? Very good. Yeah, we're making a new account, right? I have access to the instance of account right here at self. So let's put these two things together. Let's take the class variable, all, and let's shovel in self, right? Because now every time one gets initialized, that instance, right, that object, like one of these that has its instance variables all set, should end up in the array that we have declared right here. Cool. Let's play. Let's see. Let's call account.all. Hey, there's our account. And we've seen this enough, right, to recognize it as like, that's definitely ACCT. I've seen that a million times. And this is why I do recommend having some sort of flow where you're like running your code with like an object that you know about and gain knowledge of, so you see it and feel familiarity. I'm going to make another account again. And then we'll check account.all again. This is very exciting stuff, y'all, because now I have this class method that can tell me all the instances, right? What if I wanted to get all of the user IDs? I could practice with my enumerables now, right? What do I do if I have an array of full objects and I wanted to get just the array of these two integers out? What kind of enumerable is that? Is that like a select? Is that a map? Is that a find? Is that an each? What kind of enumerable goes over a collection and returns the same length but different information based on doing the same thing inside of the block? So I want to iterate over each account. I want to pull just that account's user ID, and I want to throw that into an output array. What's the best tool for that job? I think map could work. If I said like ACCT, and then I had the block return ACCT.userID, knowing that on the account instance we have the add a reader for user ID that will talk to our instance variable user ID. Yeah, that's kind of nice. Also, by the way, notice that I have this like add a reader stuff at the top, but I also have my initialize method down here. I'm going to move my initialize method at this time, because in a typical Ruby class, like even if you have class methods as well as instance methods, it's like common courtesy. Welcome people to the foyer of your class, right? I'm going to create these things up top because that's kind of nice to have up front. But a lot of times in a Ruby class, you're going to see like readers, accessors, initial variables or constants getting set, and then your initialize method, and then everything else. I'm also going to get rid of this just so that there's not a lot of commentary every time we run. Cool. Let me go back. We'll see those changes take place next time through. But on this map, to finish our thought, account.userid will get run each time on the block for each account, and map is building an array of those outputs. So we end up with the first ID and the second ID. That's kind of cool, right? Like if we needed to sort these, we could just chain a sort on the end, right? It's kind of slick. We can make multiple accounts if we wanted to, and I do want to now. I want to test some of these array methods that we could get into here. So let's make some more. Account equals account.new. Oops. I'm using full words because Ruby variable names should not contain integers in them. That's just a violation of Ruby style. Like, it could still work, but it's not great. Let's give these different balances. Cool. We're here. Show that we're initializing accounts. I think we didn't do the p self anymore, so let me get rid of that output. It's like, notice my flow is that I do these print statements to understand more about how my code is running, and then once I understand enough that the print statements feel like more clutter than explanation, I just gracefully like kind of feed those back out. But we have account.all that we can check on now for all the accounts that were created. We can see all three of them. Okay, let's do another array practice here. If this is account.all, what's an enumerable method that we could use to get one particular account that has a given user ID? Feel free to chat or come off mute. What's an enumerable method to locate a single thing that matches a certain condition? Find, very good. And find will be the kind of block that has a boolean, and if the boolean returns true for any of the things, then that first one where it's true is going to come out. And if the boolean never returns true for any of them, then find gives us nil. Let's fail first. I'm going to call account.all.find. And then we'll do ACCT. Notice I'm naming this variable ACCT because I know that everything in account.all is an account. When you're naming your pipe variable in an enumerable, that's what you're naming. You're naming each of the individual things in the collection that you're using the enumerable with. I might be thinking of ID here, but if I say ID, that's going to screw me up because I don't have IDs, I have accounts. I need to remember that I have something here that I can call user ID on. Account.userid equals 5. There is no account with user ID of 5, so we find a nil, right? If we're looking for a user ID of 4, though, then we get the account that we're looking for. And what's the version of find that's more general than find? The one that can go and get multiple results that the Boolean was true. Anybody remember? Find all, right? So we could try one of these, find all. What if we did this? Account.vip equals false. Ooh, undefined method VIP. Why is account.vip undefined? Any thoughts on that? Let's go back to the class and look. I have an instance variable for it. Why couldn't I call account.vip? What's missing for that instance variable that's not missing for others? Very good. Yeah, right? The way that we can call .userid is because we have add a reader for user ID. If we want to be able to call .vip, we should add VIP to that zone as well. Nice. So if we come back here, run this back. Now we can call on account.all.findAll. Yeah, let's try this again. And sure, none of the accounts were VIP. So let's actually make one of these VIP. Let's make this last one a VIP. $750? What a high roller. You're special. Whatever, I don't know. I'm watching Snowpiercer again this weekend. Yeah, I guess so, right? Gotta watch Snowpiercer again, really get into it. Get my class consciousness popping. Let's try this line again. Find all, and I'm going to switch it because it's a synonym too. If you're going to say find all, you could also say select in every single one of those cases. They mean the same exact thing. And so check it out. Yeah, we now were able to check just kind of by process of elimination that our VIP is working right and that we were able to set this VIP to true no problem because I don't see the $750 account sitting here in account.all.select anymore. We could do something like this. We could do account.all.maxBuy. This is a fun enumerable that we haven't even looked at. But when you say max buy, you just put in the thing that you want to check on and then it's going to sort and then pull the highest value for you. So if I want to max buy user ID, this should give me the account with the highest user ID, right? If I want to do max buy, I think I can do a min buy user ID. That gives me the lowest user ID. If I want to find the lowest balance, you can get that one. If we want to find, oh, here's a fun one. What if we wanted to do account.all.sort by? I want to sort all of the accounts that there are on some certain condition, right? Let's go lowest to highest on balance. And if we wanted to do the opposite, we could just say negative account.balance. right? And that'll be a reverse sort. So now we have a lot of power, right? We have account instances that know unto themselves how to communicate per thing, right? Then we also have this class level awareness of all of the accounts that there are and ways that we can compare them to each other. So then we could write some really cool method of like, maybe like def self, so it's a class method, self.vip report, right? And you know how like each account had this info thing, right? What if we added VIP info to the instance method? Oops, broke something. I have the ID, self user ID, and a balance of self balance. I am. Am I a VIP or not? I'm just gonna do that. Am I a VIP? And then I'll say some variable goes in here. Is VIP. And I'll say here that if self.vip is VIP equals yes, else is VIP equals not yet. Sure, that's fine. Not yeti. That's funny. Cool. So if I'm a VIP, this will fill in with yes at the end. Otherwise, we're going to say no. That's what I intend for like one account to display its info. I want to start there because I want to do a VIP report and I want all of the accounts to say that their VIP is as like a triumphant finish. So if we run this, oh no, a syntax error. What happened? Well, I have my if else end. Oh, but then I ended my if. Wait, that's def end. That seems okay. Let's slow it down. Account.rb79. I have the ID. Am I a VIP? Is VIP? We have an end here that ends this def. We have an if, an else, an end. I think I did open another method. Yeah, remember, yep, up here we have our self VIP report. So we'll end that method, and I think that'll do it. Thank you. Let's look at account 2.info. Am I a VIP? Not yet. And then let's check account 3.info. So we've added this little VIP notion to an account. And so that's the instance's job, right? If I needed to know all the info of one account, that's totally an instance method's job. So I have this class method, though, that's supposed to tell me about all of the VIP accounts that there are, right? So like the goal here is to list info of all accounts that are VIP. So first we need to like get all VIP accounts. And then we need to iterate and get info from each to print to the screen. So first, how do we get all the VIP accounts? Well, I'm in a class method, right? So if I'm in a class method, self is going to be the class, not the instance, right? If I'm in an instance method, self is an instance. If I'm in a class method, self is the class. So if I'm in one class method and I want to call another class method from here, I can just say self.all. That should go to my class method, so that should give me the array of all the instances that I have. So if I do a self.all.select, kind of like we practiced in pry, and if I do have a self.all and I'm a class account, I still will have instances of account that I'm iterating over. And then I want to find all the accounts where the account .vip equals true. Yes. one 100%. Yeah. What I would normally do is if you're not sure, like let's just fire into a binding.pry with it, and then we'll ask it directly when we're there, or we could p self as well. When in doubt, p yourself. That's always what I say. Starting now. No. Let's see if we want to call this method and see what self is. Let's comment this out and just deal with this part. First, I need to figure out how to get this method called. It looks like a class method, so I'd need to call it on the account class with a capital A. And then I think we'd get into a binding.pry and be able to see more. So I'm going to call my shot and call the method as I intend it. Account.vip report. Believing that when this fires off, it should run this line here, and then we'll print out self and then hit a binding.pry to do any more examining that we need to. Let's try it out. Account.rb. Cool. We did p-self. It's hard to notice. It's just the word account. Let's check it out again. Yep, self is class account there, right? We don't see any hashtag stuff, no instance variables listed. That's just the account class. So that's further proof that when we're in a class scoped method, that self is talking about that level of scope, which is the class. Yeah, so those are two strategies. I personally am not going to do a p-self without some sort of other like put statement over it. I find it very hard to read my output sometimes, and so I like to I'll even do this. I'll do like puts asterisk times 85, because I don't know if you knew this, but you can multiply strings. So now we go in here, and it's very, very clear where what it is that I was looking for is sitting. So I strongly recommend becoming a good puts and p debugger. Sometimes I find that people get so tied up in like, can I even get into binding.pry, that then they get in there and they forget what it was that they were even looking for. So I find that it's a good strategy to develop the skill of isolating the piece that you're not sure about, in this case self, and then finding a way to get Ruby to tell you the truth about it by any means. So now that I know that self is the account class, I feel like account.all is going to work for self.all.select. And maybe, oh, you know what? We could set this to a variable, right? We could say like VIPs equals, and then we could do a binding.pry here to see where we're at. Let's run it back. In the VIP report, check our VIPs. Hey, check it out. It's our one account that we made a VIP. Maybe we can make 2 accounts VIPs this time just to make sure that we can catch multiples as well. So let's do this. 42. I'm going to keep in 42 as it is. I'm just going to make this one a VIP. Let's run it back. Exit. Count.rb. Oops, vipped. Nice. So yeah, this is working as we expected. We found the list of our VIPs, and then if we wanted to do the next piece, right? If this is our VIPs, then we could iterate and get info from each to print to the screen. If I'm just trying to print some stuff out to the screen, and each loop is a great way to do that. We could say like vips dot each do VIP account. Still wanting to remember that what I have there is an account, right? Because VIP is a tricky thing to say here, because I might get confused with VIP as just a Boolean value, and so I want to be clear that I'm talking about a VIP account and not a VIP attribute on one account. And that reminds me that I can call VIP account dot info that we wrote, and we could print that out to the screen. So I don't think we're going to need this one anymore. That can go. And I don't think we need this pry session because we knew that self was there when we looked. And so now if we try to run account.vip report, this app should tell us about all the accounts that are VIPs one at a time. I have the ID 42 and a balance of 100. Am I a VIP? Not yet. So how did this one get into there? Interesting. What did we do? VIPs self.all.select account.vip equals true, but then VIPs.each put account info. I don't remember setting VIP to true on this first account. So why am I seeing 42 and a balance of 100, VIP not yet? Any thoughts? What am I assuming? I'm assuming that self.all.select gave me the same thing that I saw last time, which was 2 VIPs. Let's try this. Let's do a binding.pry here. We can always examine the point that I just started to lose my own foothold on my expectation, right? I was expecting this to have 2 and not 3, so somewhere between here we got mixed up. Let's see what happened. Let's look at the value of VIPs here. It's just 2. Interesting. So if we said this same code here, VIPs.each do VIP account. Oops, I can't just copy paste. VIPs, great. VIPs.each. I'm just going to print out what I've got in VIPs this way. And that still just shows 2 there. Interesting. So what's going on as we run this code? We puts account.info. That's what it was, y'all. Account.info isn't part of the VIP report. This is just a different account that we put its info out. So I didn't need this line anymore, and that was distracting me. It was showing that line and then showing the actual VIP report, and I thought that that first account was in the VIP report because of the order of things that I did. Sometimes you go into a binding.pry and everything that you expect to be there is there, and that is good information. It tells you to start looking elsewhere to an even more baseline assumption, right? Which is maybe I'm just reading this wrong. That works out just fine. Very cool. So I wanted to talk about self. I wanted to talk about the class variable scope, and I wanted to talk about how by putting these kind of things together, we can develop this really nice kind of awareness. Like we just started with basic bank account user stories yesterday, and now we've managed to kind of showcase a feature that a bank manager might need to know about as they prepare to call certain accounts and show them about new features that the bank has. We could also totally have a class method to give me the account with the lowest balance. We could have a class method to give me any accounts that have an ID lower than 50 for like their like long time customer promotion or something like that. The first 50 customers to this bank are going to get something special. Cool. So, any questions on that stuff that I've been talking about and showing off so far before we fire off into OO person for the morning? Alrighty. Well, without further ado, I'm going to pause the screen share and get to